George Harrison was known as the Quiet Beatle, but his story is far from boring. To give you an idea, did you know he mortgaged his house and paid $30 million for a movie ticket? This is a man who quit the Beatles.
I think I'll be leaving the band now.
Although his departure was temporary, the Beatles were going to break up for good shortly after that. The reason? No, it wasn't just Yoko Ono. For George, it was about who he was and how he felt within the Beatles. And in order to understand him, we need to know what makes him tick. So we can understand how he changed the direction of popular culture and music, or how he was accused of stealing a song, and why he was frustrated with the Beatles, especially John and Paul. We'll even see how he got stabbed 40 times.
Is there anything you'd say to George if he was around today?
Fancy a cup of tea?
In 1956, while riding his bicycle, a 13-year-old George Harrison heard Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel from a nearby house and fell in love with rock and roll. So, as a boy, he was dreaming about guitars. And then, his dad bought him one. He thought he couldn't be happier, but that's only because he couldn't even dream what was going to come next. During his commute to school on the school bus, he met another boy. They bonded over their shared love for music. And that boy was, of course, Paul McCartney.
And I said, I know this guy. He's a bit young, but he's good.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles!
Close your eyes and I'll kiss.
Right before they started the British invasion by appearing on Ed Sullivan's show in the US, he had a sore throat and the doctor told him not to talk too much before the show. Something that didn't go unnoticed by the media, and that's how he got the nickname The Quiet Beatle. The Quiet Beatle was the band's link to American music. He would incorporate styles such as soul and folk rock into their music.
He was clearly an innovator. George, to me, was taking certain elements of R&B and rock and rockabilly and creating something unique.
After trying LSD, George Harrison became fascinated with Indian culture and philosophy. His unique approach to making pop music contributed significantly to popularizing Indian and Eastern culture and values in the West. He played Indian instruments in songs like Norwegian Wood and Love You Too. And when he wanted to write a song that incorporates Eastern philosophy of relativism, he decided to just open a book and write a song based on the first words he saw, which happened to be Gently Weeps. That endeavor produced While My Guitar Gently Weeps, a song for which he asked his buddy Eric Clapton for help for the lead guitar parts. This would soon cost him his wife. Just kidding. I mean, Clapton did marry Harrison's wife later on, but that has nothing to do with this song, I guess.
You always annoyed when I say that. I'm trying to help, you know, but I always hear myself annoying you.
In 1968, George met Bob Dylan and the band. After seeing their close and communal relationship, he really began to question his place in the Beatles.
The biggest joke, to be yourselves. Because that was the purpose of going there, to try and find who yourself it really is.
Yes, well, we found that, didn't we?
And if you were really yourself, you wouldn't be any of who we are now.
And his feelings of being overshadowed by the creative dominance of Paul and John got stronger.
Yeah, okay, well, I don't mind. I'll play, you know, whatever you want me to play. Or I won't play at all if you don't want me to play. You know, whatever it is that will please you, I'll do it.
What do you and Ringo do while John and Paul write songs?
We play marbles or marples.
The Beatles were growing apart, but George was just growing. Towards the breakup of the Beatles, George was starting to find confidence in his songwriting abilities. He rejected Paul's suggestions for his song Something, and that song became particularly successful. A big fan of the song was Frank Sinatra.
This is a great song by George Harrison of the Beatles. It's one of the best love songs, I believe, to be written in 50 or 100 years.
And when you consider how popular Here Comes the Sun is even today, Harrison had now really matured as a songwriter and started to gain recognition as a peer in songwriting of the insanely prolific Lennon-McCartney duo. In the early days of the Beatles, George wasn't a great songwriter. At least John Lennon said so in one of his interviews. But after writing songs like Something and Taxman, George had really grew as a songwriter, and by now he had amassed a great number of songs. But he was still limited in his contributions to the albums they released and felt frustrated with the other two titans of songwriting in the band.
The event is so momentous that historians may one day view it as a landmark in the decline of the British Empire. The Beatles are breaking up.
In 1970, when it was time for the Beatles to break up, George was more than ready to pursue a solo career. But it wouldn't be without problems. He had a vast back catalogue of songs that he couldn't release when he was in the Beatles. So much so that shortly after their breakup, he released all those songs in a triple album. It topped the charts and still holds the record as the most successful solo album ever released by any Beatle. Among its tracks was My Sweet Lord, which became a #1 hit. But this song was going to cause great troubles for George Harrison.
Could you retire? Would you think of being anything other than a musician?
Well, recently I've been more of a lawyer. I've been to court so
We'll come
much.
to that in a minute.
It was claimed that My Sweet Lord was based on He's So Fine, a 1963 hit song by the Chiffons.
He's so fine. My sweet Lord. My Lord.
He was sued for copyright infringement. The court ruled that George had unintentionally drawn on a pre-existing melody, a phenomenon known as cryptomnesia, where a forgotten memory resurfaces as one's own creation. It will take almost 30 years for the lawsuit to come to an end, and it ultimately cost Harrison about $600,000. Apart from music, George was also into movie production. After a documentary and a concert film, he set his eyes on something really different. He was a great supporter of creative freedom and also a big fan of Monty Python, a British comedy troupe. They were about to make a new movie when their deal with the production company fell through. But George said he really wanted to see the movie, and he put a mortgage on his house and paid £3 million for the production, which makes up about $30 million in today's money. The movie's director Terry Jones described his involvement as the world's most expensive cinema ticket. The movie was a big hit at the box office. After that, George carried on with his productions. His production company went on to release many movies in the 1980s, which was a great boost for the British cinema that was struggling at the time. And he even worked with Madonna at some point.
You worked with Madonna on Shanghai Surprise.
I tried to.
What was that like?
Do you want the truth? It was a pain in the ass.
Being an avid follower of Eastern philosophy, it's not shocking that George loved nature and plants. He was actually a gardener who really took his craft serious. In his manor that sits on 37 acres, he planted about 500 maple trees. But it was here that George would live through hell.
And he'd already been stabbed. But we all fell into a big pile, and I managed to get out from underneath, and George pinned him down, and George said to me, "I've got the knife." And I thought, what knife?
Okay, this is a really creepy story. In 1999, a man who was mentally ill broke into George's house. He was holding a knife and he attacked George Harrison and his wife. He only stopped when Harrison's wife Olivia hit him on the head many times with a fireplace poker.
I hit the guy several times, I could see the blood spreading down his blonde hair, and then he got up and he chased me and had me around the neck, and then George got up and jumped on his back. And poor George, he said, God, just when he got off of me, I was thinking, good. Then I had to get up and fight him again.
George was seriously injured. He had 40 stab wounds, but he fortunately survived. However, according to people close to him, that incident brought about a change in him, for the worse. It brought back the cancer he fought off a few years ago, and 2 years after the knife attack, that cancer killed him. It's very hard to overstate the success and impact of the Beatles, but that shouldn't stop us from appreciating its members individually, in this case George. Although he had to fight for his voice in the Beatles, it's clear that he gave a direction and sound to the band that allowed it to be the legend that it was. His blend of different musical styles and instruments, coupled with the band's exceptional ability in producing hit songs, defined the sound of 60s and onward. He was never a flashy guitarist, but both during and after his time in the Beatles, he always knew how to touch people's heart with his music, which is, at the end of the day, what really matters. He will be remembered by many generations to come.
Okay, cue the clap now.
Thanks for watching, but wait! If you want to know more about other guitarists like Jimmy Page or Stevie Ray Vaughan, you can watch either of these videos. See you there.